And I do want to take you to this breaking news that we are following right now, as the Israel Defense Forces just posting this photo on X saying a 3-kilometer, which I believe is just under 2-mile long multi-story underground tunnel route was located and dismantled in central Gaza. The tunnel consisted of multiple branches with several rooms, weapons, and means for long-term stay used by terrorist operatives were located. So again, this information here just coming in from the IDF as they do release some of these pictures that they have located. I do want to talk a little bit more about the other developments here, as the Israeli military has once again urged Palestinians to evacuate Khan Younis and get to a humanitarian zone. The Israel Defense Forces began Thursday with what appears to be its third invasion of Khan Younis. The first invasion back in December, with Israel gaining operational control in February after engaging in heavy fighting with the Hamas militants, and the most recent offensive wrapped up just a week ago. To help break down all of the latest developments, I do want to bring in a true expert right now. We have Brian Katulis, a senior fellow for U.S. foreign policy at the Middle East Institute in D.C., joining us live. Thank you so much for taking the time, as always, to be here with us today.
Hi, Josh.
All right, so first off, I do want to ask you a little bit about this new discovery, the photo that was just released by the IDF here, because we do know that there are plenty of tunnels that have been found, not just in Gaza, but all over the place, that are likely being used by the terror organization Hamas.
Yeah, two things on this. First, it's no surprise because we've known that Hamas has constructed hundreds of miles of tunnels. I would add that Hezbollah and Lebanon as well have spent a lot of time trying to dig into Israeli territory, which second, it just shows to what great lengths and the amount of time, money, resources that have been used to actually construct what are essentially efforts to threaten Israel, to actually get weapons into different areas and to hide from them now, as this campaign is now approaching its close to a year when it comes to October. So it just shows that there's been years-long careful planning and the misuse of resources by groups like Hamas and Hezbollah as well to build these tunnels.
And I do want to talk a little bit more about some of the other developments here, because the IDF, as I mentioned, is once again calling on Palestinians there in Khan Younis to evacuate to a humanitarian zone. This would, I believe, be the third invasion there. So my question is, what is left to do in Khan Younis? Do we even know?
Well, here's part of the challenge with the way that Israel's conducted its military operations in Gaza. It's akin to whack-a-mole, if you know the game, where you hit things and they pop up in one area and then move in another area. And the problem is that Israel does not really have a clearly defined post-war end goal. And we saw this highlighted when Benny Gantz, one of the former ministers in Netanyahu's government, resigned earlier this summer because his main concern was that there was no post-war plan. So when you don't have a plan to actually secure areas after you've taken out certain terrorists, they can move around even in pretty constrained places like the Gaza Strip. So I think that's what's going on here, is that they're very real threats that the Israel Defense Forces is trying to take out. But those threats tend to migrate when you then don't, after you clear, if you don't hold that area and then have a plan to build and rebuild, that hopefully, Palestinians or some Arab forces could come in, as some have discussed, to maintain security. So I think that's what we're seeing in this endless cycle of operations like this.
I want to pop up a live image that you've probably seen quite a bit over the past several months here. This is the Israel-Gaza border, as we did hear from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who appeared to almost apologize in a Time magazine interview for security failures that allowed that Hamas-led attack on October 7th, but added that he does have no intention to resign from office. And that's kind of what I've wanted to ask you here, because we've seen anti-Netanyahu protests all over Israel even prior to October 7th. So once the war ends, could Netanyahu be pushed out of office?
Yes, very quickly, and I think easily. And even maybe before the war ends. But the problem here is that there's no real clear alternative leader because of Israel's fractured politics. Netanyahu is one of the least popular figures in Israeli politics today, yet ironically, he remains the leader. in part because his opponents aren't as unified, and there's not as clear of an agenda. And the war and the prospect of an expanded war, if Iran attacks or Hezbollah attacks in the next few days or weeks, also reinforces his capacity to stay in power. But his ultimate failure has been to not protect the Israeli people. Not on October 7th, not in the very much daily attacks on Israel. And a lot of people also in Israel are concerned about his inability to get hostages home. So he's a weaker leader, but he also faces a weak and divided political opposition, which is part of the reason why he's able to stay in power. That could shift even before the war ends, or certainly after the war is over.
And would that make a difference if it were to happen during the war itself and Netanyahu's pushed out of office while the war is still going on?
Probably won't make that much of a difference, because most Israeli leaders are going to respond to two main things. One, the security threats that they see, not just from Gaza or Lebanon, but from the broader region. And as I mentioned, those threats are on a daily basis, rockets coming in, attacks from different areas. And second, whoever leads Israel next will also have to respond to the competing pressures they have from their domestic audience, from their own constituents. The debates that we have here in America are mostly on the sidelines and largely irrelevant compared to that debate inside of Israel. And there's a lot of discontent with Netanyahu about how he's handling the ceasefire talks, and a strong desire to get hostages home. Yet he still doesn't have a clear opponent in their system.
I want to pop up this other post here. This is also from the IDF. It was an announcement this morning where they said the commander of CENTCOM landed in Israel yesterday for his second visit this week as the official guest of the chief of the general staff. How significant is it to have the commander of CENTCOM visit not once, but twice in a matter of a week?
Well, it shows that he and his team are actively working behind the scenes, not just with Israel, but with a number of Arab governments, because he's traveled throughout the region, to essentially be the glue in a regional framework to try to defend not just Israel, but other countries like Jordan, some of the Gulf states that could be threatened by what Hezbollah and Iran and also the Houthis in Yemen might do and might fire. So we saw this in April when Iran fired more than 350 ballistic missiles and drones, and most of those were actually shot down through effective regional security cooperation. So the U.S. remains the essential glue in all of this. For all of the people who've argued that the U.S. should just leave and abandon the region, my view is that those arguments are a recipe for even greater war and bigger chaos in the region, because without General Kurilla and the CENTCOM team there, many of these countries would not coordinate in the way that we do. And it's different than the Iraq or Afghanistan war, where we had hundreds of thousands of troops in those countries. What we're essentially doing is playing an enabling role, trying to help the coordination between different countries that want to defend themselves against threats largely backed by Iran.
And we've heard from U.S. and Israeli officials over the last several days as Israel is preparing for a quote-unquote imminent attack from Iran. Many people have actually said it's likely going to be Hezbollah that does launch a major attack prior to Iran. Why is that, and is that likely?
For two reasons, I think. One, Hezbollah saw one of its top leaders killed in an assassination and attack earlier this month. And second, Hezbollah is probably the most capable when it comes to military capacity as well as sophisticated weapons. Iran has backed Hezbollah for decades and has funneled a lot of military hardware into Lebanon, where Hezbollah is just across from Israel's border. So it's, I think, quite easier for them to actually target and pinpoint some locations, including military sites inside of Israel. And if Iran is going to move forward, they're likely going to have Hezbollah be the first lead in all of that. I think many people are anticipating different scenarios. Worst case scenario is that you see something that looks like what we saw in mid-April, but going on for a long period of time, for several days, where Israelis are under threat from air attacks from missiles and drones, and that will test the air defense system. There's other scenarios that seem less risky and dangerous, which is just a repeat of what we saw in mid-April. But I think we're probably in for a very complicated period, and it comes at a time when The U.S., Qatar, Egypt, several countries are trying to get Israel and Hamas to get back to the ceasefire hostage negotiations talks next week, which hopefully will lead to some calming of the situation if it produces an outcome.
And that actually leads me to my next question, because we did learn from Netanyahu yesterday that he will send a delegation, whether it's to Doha or to Cairo next Thursday, the 15th. And he says that they are going to be discussing the framework. They're finalizing all of that, also the details. My question for you, does that indicate that we are any closer to a hostage release ceasefire deal than we were maybe weeks or months ago? Or have we kind of been here before?
I hope it means that we're closer, but we definitely have been here before, because we've heard almost every week there's some hope, there's new meetings, and there's some talk. And the simple fact of the matter is news organizations, outside analysts really don't know what's going on in these talks because they're quite sensitive. I would say that the odds for success are quite low, in part because first, Hamas has seen one of its top figures taken out in the attack in Tehran last week. And Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, has been quoted as saying that he's actually quite pleased with the situation, with Palestinians dying, because it's provoking this backlash against Israel. It's really hard with that party, with one side of the conflict who sees an interest in continuing the conflict, to say that they're going to get to yes. And the other side of the equation is Israel's quite divided. There's even divisions within Netanyahu's government and his own team, negotiators that he sent to previous rounds of talks, at odds with one another. So I hope it works, because we want to see this war end and especially see hostages come home. But it seems quite unlikely that might happen, especially if there's a wider conflict with Iran and Hezbollah looming.
Before I let you go here, I do want to ask one more question about the attack that happened several days ago over at the military base in Iraq. We know that we did have 5 arrests that have now been made, and this, of course, injured several U.S. officials there. So my question, is there any sort of evidence that we've seen come out that that attack is in some way connected to the war in Gaza?
Well, all of these conflicts in their own way are interlinked with each other, but this particular attack, I think, is probably much more linked to what Iran experienced and the assassination of a Hamas leader in Tehran, the tensions on this front. So I suspect it's more part of this tit-for-tat exchange between U.S. forces, and we saw an episode of this in late January when 3 U.S. soldiers were killed in Jordan by an Iranian-backed militia drone. And I think it's a bit more in that shadow war, though it would be artificial to say that this is not at all connected to Gaza, because Iran and its network of proxies, including the Houthis in Yemen, have used the war in Gaza as an excuse to actually increase their attacks. And the only time we've really seen some calm in the last 10 or 11 months is when there was that brief ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in late November of last year. That actually also calmed the situation and decreased these attacks. So that's why I hope the diplomacy works, but it seems quite unlikely with all of these different actors trying to expand their influence and reach and power through military means as opposed to through diplomacy.
And like you said, we can sit here and say this is likely to happen, this is likely to happen, but we're not the ones who know all of that information. So I do appreciate you joining us to help break down what we do know. Is there anything else you want to add before I let you go?
No, I think the Middle East is at this precipice of a very complicated conflict. And if Iran strikes, and if it takes action like it did in April, it'll show its true colors once again, that it's not just a threat to regional security, but it's a threat to global security. But how to respond to that threat is, I think, the trickiest question that several U.S. administrations, not the Biden administration, not Trump, or Obama, or even George W. Bush, have really clearly answered, is how do you deal with the challenge of Iran in a way that actually doesn't lead to a wider conflict in the region and in the world.
Ryan Katulis, thank you again for being here with us. We appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me.